Greetings. This is Caroline Staten with Transition US. Thank you for joining our call today. I expect that others will be rolling on in the next several minutes. And really pleased that you're joining us and look forward to your comments and thoughts on this topic, as well as any other ideas for topics that could be helpful for you. So please do let us know. And we want to continue to offer the webinars at no cost, but do ask that you consider making a donation. We have a donation button on our website, transitionus.org. So thank you in advance to those of you able to do this. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Scott McEwen. Scott is a transition trainer. He's also the training coordinator for Transition US and was the initiator of Transition Sebastopol in Northern California. That's, I think, going on 4 years old. So Scott has a lot of experience both on the training side as well as sort of in the trenches, in the field, doing the work and making things happen. So glad that you're able to be with us today, Scott. And I thought we could start by doing a brief intros of people on the call, if that's okay with you, Scott, and then we can.
Great. I'd like to hear who's on the call and where they're from.
Great. Let's start with you, Hank. If you could give us your full name and let us know where you're calling from and if you're having a transition initiative in your area.
Yes. Hi, my name is Hank Gibson, and there's a group of us here from the future Transition Port Angeles. We're about to be put in our final paperwork for initiative status here, and we're looking forward, I would guess, about a year from now from, changing initiating group to core team kind of status and unleashing and that sort of thing. And Port Angeles is on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State.
Thanks, Hank, and thanks for getting all the information early and making your plans. So wonderful. Susan?
Hi, this is Susan O'Brien. I'm from Transition Hendersonville in Hendersonville, North Carolina. I'm listening today. We have an initiating group that's been together for about a year, and I'm hoping to pick up some new ideas from some other initiating groups and how to go forward.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Susan. Jill?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Hi, Jill.
Hi. Hey, Scott. We're still fussing around trying to get the technology worked out here, but so I am a founding member of Transition Joshua Tree, and we're really excited to be doing this webinar because we are right on the verge of transitioning to an elected steering group. We already have one elected member who is here today, Janet Tucker, and so great that Scott's doing this. He did the training for transition for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jill, and folks there with you in Joshua Tree, and that's in California. David, where are you from?
I'm from Hendersonville, Transition Hendersonville,
and
great. We have, I believe, several of us here trying to learn about how we take the next step from a transition group that's been around for a couple of years that's starting to get a little tired. How do we replenish our energy and take the next step?
Great. Well, I hope you come away with great ideas today. Frances.
Yes, hi. I'm also Transition Hendersonville. So I echo whatever David just said.
Well, thanks for joining.
We're in Western North Carolina.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Frances. Sharon?
Hi. I'm going to say ditto as well. I live in Mills River. I'm 20 minutes south of Asheville, where I've participated in Transition Asheville, and I'm a more active participant in Transition Hendersonville.
Well, thank you for joining us, Sharon. And Kathy Jennings.
Yes, hi. I just joined you, so I missed part of this, but I'm also with the Joshua Tree group, I'd say, and but I'm on the road this week, so I'm calling in from Santa Rosa.
Well, wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Scott.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Great to hear from everyone on the call. Kathy, I guess you're right down the street from me. I'm in Sebastopol, right next to Santa Rosa. So good to have you here. I'll just briefly go over the flow of today's webinar. What we're really talking about is a structure that goes past the initiating group. And as we know, transition initiatives start out with having an initiating group, some kind of steering committee formed to get the ball rolling. And after a while, after the ball is rolling, there comes a time when it feels like evolving into a new kind of structure, not just the same original people that started it. And so we're talking about that process of making that shift to some new kind of structure past that original initiating group. And so that's what it's about. And I broke up today's webinar into several parts. First, we're going to do a brief overview of the transition model regarding transition structures, the initiating group, and look at what the handbook says and sort of see what the model says about this. Then we're going to examine actually transition taughtness a little bit. They're sort of the original, most advanced transition initiative in the world. And we can kind of get a good example of how they evolved into some kind of a different structure. And then we're going to talk about the process of making this shift and what the handbook says, what it doesn't say, some of the challenges that arise. And then as a case study, I'm going to talk about this shift that Transition Sebastopol underwent about a year and several months ago, as we had an original initiating group, and then we morphed that into a working group council. And I'll walk through the process that we went through and what we learned, what we maybe did right, what we didn't do right, and hopefully that can be helpful for you as you consider when to do this process. I want to emphasize that there is no one right way of doing this. As in all of transition, there's some ideas, there's some suggestions, there's some recommendations, there's some possibilities, but there's not one cookie-cutter way of having this happen, and it may look very different depending on your particular initiative and your particular community. So I don't want to give the impression that there is some exact, correct one way of doing this. So we'll look at our process. We'll look at perhaps what other structures as well that other groups have come up with in the Transition US, and it's more of an exploration, not necessarily this is how it's done. So Caroline, do you want to just mention anything about hand raising and all that?
Yes, thank you. When you have a comment or question, you can press 1 on your keypad, and I can see that on a screen, and Scott can see it too. So that would be wonderful. And I did send out a couple of emails to the folks who had signed up. One was an email that had been sent out a year plus ago to Transition Sebastopol, so you can look at that if you'd like later. And Scott will be talking about that process, the metamorphosis. And I did also send out an email that has a number of supporting documents, and we may be getting out to you another email, but we haven't. I haven't got that yet. It's in the ethers somewhere, so that might be something to follow along on. But in the process of this call, again, pressing 1 on your keypad alerts us, and we can respond. Back to you, Scott.
All right, great. Yes, and hopefully I'm uploading a PDF of an actual whole slide presentation I did, but on my very slow connection, it's just not cooperating very well. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll actually have this PDF of a PowerPoint slide presentation, which has a lot of graphics of what we'll be talking about. And hopefully you'll get that somewhere during the call. But we'll start off. We don't really need it so much. So right off the bat, as we know, the original Transition Handbook had what was called the 12 steps of transition. Now it's more or less referred to as ingredients. The idea of steps implied that there was some exact ordering to everything, and transition isn't quite that, again, cookie cutter. It's more about there's these different ingredients to consider that you implement and use as you're developing your transition initiative. So what was the 12 steps in the handbook is now really talked about as the 12 ingredients. But if for those of you who may have a handbook handy, you could look at that section. I know in the older version of the handbook, it's on page 148, and it's probably a little different on the newer versions of the Transition Handbook if you actually want to refer to this. And it's the step, what they call step number 1, or ingredient number 1, which is set up a steering group and design its demise from the outset. And I want to read part of that here, the handbook. So Bill Mollison, I'm reading now, the co-originator of permaculture, once famously said, "I can't save the world on my own. It'll take at least 3 of us," something like that. And so what it describes here is what is essential is its importance of becoming increasingly clear is that from the first meeting, that group, that initiating group, must design its own demise, set a defined lifespan for its functioning. So many groups get atrophied and stuck with people who cling to their roles in a way that stifles the progress of the project. In the longer term, it is important that the project becomes driven by those who are actually doing things. I would suggest, and this is Rob Hopkins speaking through the book, I would suggest that you form your steering committee of reliable people with the aim of getting through steps 2 through 5. And those steps are raise awareness, lay the foundations, organize a great unleashing, and form groups or form working groups. That's a suggestion. And agree that once a minimum of 4 subgroups are formed, your group disbands and the steering group becomes made up of 1 person from each of the groups. This requires a degree of humility, but it is very important in order to put the process of the success of the project above the individuals involved. It's also quite a relief. It means that you aren't forming a group whose aim is the complete relocalization of the settlement in question. Just do the first few steps, 3, a much more manageable task. So that's what's recommended, is to design its demise from the very beginning. Now, the purpose of the initiating group, of the functions, some of them, and we'll get a slide to you at least by the end of the presentation so you can look at this later. But one of the purposes of the initiating group is to plan the own demise, the great unleashing, working groups, setting up group development, raising awareness, and networking. And those are pretty much the same things that's laid out in the handbook. Now, the purpose in the companion, which is the updated version of the handbook, the Transition Companion, it says, it has a slightly different take on it, and I'm going to read from that as well. So the work of the initiating group starts the core activities of transition. That's what the companion says. And then it lists these things: building partnerships, awareness raising, visioning, reskilling, practical activities, and attending to the well-being of the group and the people in it. Now, I'm going to read again from the Transition Companion. In the Transition Handbook, it was suggested that an initiating group would design its demise from the outset. And some initiatives, such as Transition Forest Row, who used their unleashing to tell everyone who had come that they were now handing the initiative over to whoever wanted to drive the process forward, have put this into practice. For some, it has worked really well. The initiating group's work ended at a launch or an open space event, at which new working groups were formed and then handed over, running the project to a new structure. For others, the process is more gradual. As new groups form, new people join the group, and the initiators take a step back or move into a different role, perhaps finally getting to do the practical project they wanted to do or organizing a specific working group. It says here in bold print, and this is my final reading of the book, an initiating group serves to kick the transition process off, its members acting as the early pioneers who network and lay good foundations until another group takes over the reins of what has become an established and wider-reaching transition initiative. So you can see that the companion takes a slightly different take. It's evolved. The thinking has evolved in transition, where it's not such a clear-cut this is the way you do it. When you get to 4 working groups, 4 to 5 working groups, you make the shift. That was what was expressed in the handbook. It's more, well, at some point it may be gradual, it may be slow, but there's going to be some kind of an evolution that takes place. So I think that really shows how the thinking has evolved in transition, so it's not quite so cut and dry. So then, why when do you make the shift then, and why evolve? And so I think really what it laid out was that at a certain point, it might feel like it's getting a little calcified or it's getting a little stifled. Now, some groups, many groups, don't have working groups going. They don't have a lot of projects going. They're still in the very formative stages. And perhaps that's not the time to hand it off if there's nobody to hand it off to. So I think what we're kind of talking about here is generally a transition initiative that has activity going, that has working groups, have people that have come on board since that original initiating group formed, and there's a sense of we're growing, we have to do something about this. There has to be some kind of a change to allow these people who are actually doing the projects and the working groups to have a voice in how the transition initiative is being led. And that's in the primer online, it talks about that a lot. It says, that really it should be comprised of people on the ground who are doing the work, that are in the working groups. So I'm going to stop here and see, so that's kind of an overview of the general thinking about the transition model. Is there any comments or questions does anybody have? And you can press 1, raise your hand, then Caroline will put your mic on. Are there any questions so far?
There's Sharon. Go ahead.
This is a silly question, but is this strictly a conference call, or is there a web link that I'm supposed to be looking at the same time?
Yeah, hopefully you'll get a file that you can look at the same time.
Okay.
But not through the website. It'll probably come at the end, and I apologize for that.
That's fine. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't missing something. Thank you.
Okay.
And Frances?
Yes, I wanted to ask, you assume in what you were just discussing that there are people joining the initiating group, there are projects ongoing. The situation, as I define it in my transition group, is that we have an initiating group, and it is dedicated and hardworking, but we are not getting projects off the ground that continue for very long, and we don't have people joining. So that my sense is, and others can correct me if I'm saying it badly, that we have this core group, this initiating group, but we can't seem to get others.
Yeah, well, that's a big issue, and many other transition groups have that issue. In a way, that's almost, we could talk about it a little bit here, but it's in a way another webinar, which is how to form projects and working groups, how to get people engaged, and that's a whole other process of how do you engage the community, how do you draw people in to do projects kind of under the transition banner, whether it's starting a group that's focused on some particular thing or a particular project, and that's a whole webinar unto itself. I don't want to go too much into that, because kind of what we're talking about here is a group that does have those projects, and now it's gone beyond just the initiating group. And so who makes the decisions about the direction of the transition initiative? Where's the leadership? How does that happen? And I know for our transition initiative, we had the original group, and that original group, by the way, did evolve over time. I think we started with 8 people, and over time, after a couple of years, only 2 of the original 8 were still on the initiating group. But nevertheless, it was more or less a self-selected group of people who were running the transition initiative. And at a certain point, people who were really doing amazing projects in various working groups were kind of saying, well, wait a minute, who are these people? Who elected them? Who's making, who are they? How come I'm not in that group? Or how come, what's going on here? Is this a democracy? What is this? And so once you get that kind of, then it's really time to make that shift. So that's what we're talking about here.
Scott, I'm wondering, just to answer Francis's question, a lot of that engagement happens in the awareness-raising phase and offering various films and speakers and potlucks with a purpose and various things to kind of welcome people, things that are interesting to the people in your community, that they might, come out and build some momentum that way. But I hear that we're not going to go into that very deeply on this call, and happy to see, Scott, if maybe you can help us with another call addressing Francis's topic of getting more people engaged.
Yeah, maybe I could say one thing. How we started, we did some awareness raising. Then after about 6 or 7 months, we called the community mapping event. And we really spent our time to reach out to all the different groups, environmental groups, and invite people. We had city council people there. It was almost like an unleashing. And we had a couple hundred people attend, and we all went around and listed what the resources we had in our community, and we have 17 different areas of from food, energy, animal care, all kinds of things, topics. And then on a second event, we had people gather around under the areas that they felt a personal interest to get involved in. And we found that the two biggest crowds were under the Heart and Soul banner and Food Group banner. And so we decided, wow, I guess there's interest in that. So 2 of us from the initiating group decided we would help launch those 2 groups. I took on Heart and Soul, someone else took on the Food Group, and we started those first 2 seed groups. And for the first year, those were our 2 working groups. And out of those 2 working groups, other people that had got involved spun off into a reskilling group, into an elders group, and it just kind of grew from there. So that's how we got off the ground with working groups.
Thank you, Scott. And we, again, could do another webinar at more length on that topic, so thanks for bringing it up, Francis. We have 2 more people with their hands up, David and then Jill. So David?
Yes, hi. I don't want to bog us down because probably my question is going to be more like Francis's. And also in Hendersonville, we did a lot of these outreach events and book groups and potluck dinners and all these things, and reached out to a lot of people and got some initial projects going. It's just, I think the calcification is what kind of rang my bell, is that's certainly the word that I think describes where we're at, is that there is lots of interest and hundreds of people have signed up, but taking it beyond the awareness to practical projects is I think where we're at now. It's kind of where we're stalled.
Well, we
had a food work group, but we just didn't have leadership to. We had some really good meetings and some interest, and not the leadership to keep it going. So.
Well, we had to seed that leadership from the initiating group. So we decided, those people in the initiating groups, that some of us would spin off and get a working group going. And I know I spent a lot of time developing that Heart and Soul group, and after 6 months, finally, we had events once a month or so. And then after a while, somebody really kind of emerged from that core team. I called together a core team of people that showed up at that mapping event, and we met for months before we did any events. And then we had this tight core team in this working group, and then we did months of events. And then at some point, somebody from that group really kind of emerged as a leader, and she's still the leader of the Heart and Soul group today, 3 years later. And I moved on to do another project, and that group is still going. So that's how it kind of worked for us. And I know, finding those people who have that passion, that's I guess the trick, isn't it? But some great people showed up for us, so we were lucky, I guess.
Right. Okay.
To Jill, and then we have Sharon as well.
Hi. So I don't have a question, but more of a comment. Scott, I'm glad to hear you bring up timing, because that, I think, has been so critical for us. As I look back on our 1.5 years of work, it's been the right event at the right time, and it's taken us to where we are now, which is the very quick formation of 5 working groups. But the training for transition that you did was like the really galvanizing event there. And then we had an event afterwards, an open space event, and the stated goal of that was to form working groups. And so now it would be great to talk about timing in terms of the transition from initiating to steering.
Yeah, let's get back into that, which is what this focus is really about. Jill, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, just that the timing is now for us. So we're starting to, like in a couple of days actually, we have a meeting to really sit down with the calendar and try to lay out the strategy and the plan for a phased transition, so that everybody can keep, the new group can keep working at the high level that we've been working.
Yes,
right.
And that's, so let's get into that. I'm going to kind of, since we don't have the graphics up, I'm going to skip over the original Totnes thing, and you'll get that later as you get the PDF.
Scott, could we hear from Sharon first? She had her hand up.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask if you could give us a little more definition about, you're using terms like working groups and core groups, leadership within the core group or core team within a working group. I have the feeling that in Transition Hendersonville, in fact, we do have a food working group. But just as you said in the beginning that they don't all look the same, there's been a lot of projects done around community gardening and food. There just isn't, I don't know, like the term, this core group, or there's not a structure available. We haven't presented a structure to them for showing up as a group. I don't know any better way to say this. They're not communicating with the initiating group as a working group per se. But there is a lot of activity, a lot of projects that are ongoing in relation to food. So I'm looking for a little bit of, if you could, before you go into how to transition from initiating group to something else, can you give me some definitions? Like, I know that, for example, in Transition Asheville, we did an open space, and because the initiating group was burnt out, basically. I mean, instead of doing an unleashing, they did an open space. Then they did transition to what is called a common table, and each of the different areas, transportation, energy, heart and soul, etc., are represented, I don't know if it's monthly or bi-monthly, at a common table discussion, so everybody can keep in touch with what others are doing. So I'm not really sure that Transition Hendersonville doesn't have working groups. I just don't know what your terminology is.
Okay, well, it sounds like you're doing something along those lines. And again, there isn't one exact way of doing this, but the classic transition model is the formation of what's called working groups. And the Transition Companion, you can read about this on page 129, forming working groups. And forming working groups is it's step 5 of the 12 steps of transition. So to refer to the handbook and the Transition Companion to really understand, or a transition training course really explains this process where the initiating group forms, kind of does the groundwork stuff, kind of gets the ball rolling. And the idea is to form working groups around these different topics that all eventually contribute to an energy descent action plan. And so forming the active working groups is more or less the intermediate phase, I guess you could say, of a transition initiative, where it's past the initiating group. So it may be project groups, and in many cases, working groups are already existing organizations that have their own identity. We had this happen in Sebastopol, where a group that does a lot of things around transportation. We said, can you just be our transportation working group, and you can still keep your name and do everything you're doing now and not make any changes, just send somebody to a council meeting? And they said, sure. And so you can even just kind of invite other groups to be in that role. So, but working groups is kind of the core, because one group can't do it all. the idea is eventually you want to expand into these different areas of resilience and localization in your community. It involves transportation, energy, education, food, reskilling, on and on and on. And just one group doing all of it is really too much. So as you expand out, the idea is to get these different clusters of people working on these projects wherever their passion is, all sort of connecting into one central network in a sense, which is it's transition as a network more than transition as a group. It's a network of groups in a sense, whether they start from within transition or they're outside groups that link up to this idea. That help a little bit? Or mic's off, I guess. Okay. Let's. I know we have some groups here that do have working groups, and they're interested in this, in how to make this shift, which is what this is about. So I'd like to go into that, if that's okay. So one of the challenges we had for our group was that the leaders of the working groups didn't have the time to be both in a central steering group, which we were meeting once a week, and run their working group for projects. People are busy. They don't, and so we had some very talented people that said, look, you can get me for one or the other. I'll be in the court group, the initiating group, or I'll help run a working group. I can't do both. I just don't have the time. So that was what we were up against. So at a certain point in our evolution, and I'm just more or less using I'll use transition as a sort of a test case here. We got to the point where we realized we have to make this shift where our initiative should be run by representatives of each of our working groups. And we had 9 different working groups at that time, then it went to 10. And I realize not everybody has that many working groups. And we actually have a little bit less now, but that's what we had, and we realized we had to make that shift. Now, here's where the Transition Handbook and the companion don't give a whole lot of guidance on what that structure really is. In fact, from the primer, I'm going to read from the primer for a moment. It says, we're also recognizing that there needs to be a level of fluidity. Some situations call for totally flat structure. Others demand accountability. Example, to each other and to stakeholders within the community or network. And others need people to take a lead role for a time. We don't have the answers for this beyond knowing that more successful structures will address the need for resilience, accountability, adaptability, and cooperability. Eclectism may be crucial. And then it also goes on to say, while we recognize that we need to be looking beyond traditional hierarchical models for transition initiatives, we have not yet reached an understanding of what other models might look like and which would work for us. So in a way, we're all in new territory here. I think we all realize the challenges of all of us working in groups together and cooperating. And so how is this going to work as a structure as your transition evolves, where a single initiating group just can't hold it all anymore, or really shouldn't hold it all anymore? And so there's a few tips that are suggested in the Transition Handbook, and my old copy is on page 148. So for making this shift, and his transition tip, and I'll read a few: invite a professional facilitator, change manager to help you. And I think that's really crucial, really, really helped us. Involve everybody in the transformation. Create together clear written aims and principles for the new formation, and refer to them frequently. Try to stay unattached to outcomes and let go of your own agendas. I could have done a little better on that myself. Some people will leave and others will join. Whoever turn up are the right people. And trust the process. A new mindset takes time to take root. So there's not much more guidance given to this about what this new structure should be. So finally, what some of the challenges we had in our group is that we didn't agree on when to make this shift. Some of us wanted to make it a year earlier than we actually made it. One of the problems was in our original core team initiating group, we had an agreement, and we put it in the notes of our very fourth meeting, where we wrote down, it was discussed and understood that eventually Transition Sebastopol Steering Committee will be comprised of representatives from each of the working groups. This initial steering committee will cease to exist when there are a sufficient number of working group representatives to carry on as a functioning steering committee. This could take some time. Some of the current members may not be able to be on this new steering committee if they may be able to be on the new steering committee if they are the representatives of one of the working groups. So this was, we wrote this almost 3 years before we made the actual shift. And for 1 year, we really disagreed about it because the folks that wrote this original note, most of them were gone, and we had new people on the initiating group who didn't agree that it was time to make that shift. So that was actually some tension. And then who decides and designs the process for making the shift? Now, so when we finally agreed that it was time to make the shift, people were starting to complain they weren't being represented. You know, who are these people? We don't even know who these people are on the initiating group. Who are they making decisions for us? So that started to get a little grumbling. So that really became obvious it was time to make this shift. So we, at first, the initiating group, decided to open up the whole process to design how we were going to make the shift to anyone who wanted to show up. And that soon proved for us to be quite chaotic. And it wasn't getting very far. And so what we did is we pulled back as the initiating group and said, okay, we're going to exert our right as the initiating core group and go do this as our last act as an initiating group to design the process by which we will all decide together. We're not going to design what the structure is. We're going to design the process for deciding the structure. And so we pulled back, but then within our initiating group, we had disagreements about the design for the process of deciding. And so it finally took a couple of months to us to agree on this, and it really helped to have an outside facilitator in the design process to move things forward. So we brought in a gentleman named Adam Walport of Occidental Arts and Ecology, who met with us several times before we had this big process to design the process. And Caroline, could you, if people could open the file that Caroline sent?
Which one, Scott, the metamorphosis?
No, I think it would be
the small docs.
Yeah, it should say.
I changed the titles. One's called Metamorphosis, the other's called Supporting Documents.
Was there one called Draft Agenda, number 2, TS Draft Agenda?
I think that's in the Supporting Documents email I sent to people.
If you can see, if you want to open that file, you can see the agenda for the process that we finally designed. Now, before we get too much into this, one of the questions we had internally was, just like it said in the handbook, involve everybody in the transformation. And we thought that was a good idea. This should not be a decision, the initiating group shouldn't be solely decide what the new structure is going to be. This should be something that's should be open to all the participants of the initiative. But then it got to be, what defines a participant? And that was a debate. And then we had the range of what we should include in this day. We decided it was going to be a day-long process, kind of a conference day, a full all-day workshop where we were going to get in a room, have a facilitator, and work out what our new structure was going to be and decide on that. And so, but who's in the room? And some people advocated anyone off the street, just anybody who's interested in transition can come in and participate. And then people said, really? Just literally anybody off the street that just heard of transition that day can walk in off the street and start involved in this? No. Other people thought it should be only the leaders of the working groups. So finally, the consensus opinion was anyone who had been involved in doing a project or an event. Because I think those of you who are leaders probably know the folks that always show up to the public events. This got to be frustrating for some of us. They'd always be at the movies, they'd always be at the talks, but they never take that step to actually help put on the movies or the talks or the projects. I wish I could hear voices and see if I could see, could you place one for those of you who have I'll testify to that, people who are initiative, who show up to the public events, but don't really take that step. Anybody want to press one on their phone just to confirm it? All right, I'm getting a few yeses here. Anyway, we said, you know what, that's not good enough. if you just show up to the events but you haven't lifted a finger to actually really do anything, no, that's not involved. That's not really part of a working group. That's not really being involved. And we had a little flack from people. And actually, to be honest with you, I kind of enjoyed telling people they weren't invited because they hadn't really done anything. And they really had to look at that, some people. They thought they were sort of involved, but they hadn't been. They were just kind of taking and not giving. And so that's where we decided to draw the line, that somebody had to do something more than just showing up at a public event, anything, basically. All right, so we decided that was going to be in the room, and then we sent out the invitation. And Caroline, did you email that invitation that we sent out?
The metamorphosis?
Yes, yes.
Yes, that's what it's called in the email, yeah.
So this, and I created that graphic. You could see, if you see the butterfly, the little, I went online and I got a little graphic of a caterpillar and a butterfly, and created this save the date invitation, which you can read, and feel free to use this, or some, feel free to steal some of this if you want. But the idea was this graphic: the caterpillar into this butterfly with a question mark. What is it? You decide. And we thought that was pretty good. And so you can see the working groups listed below. We just kind of, and also below there is the journey to transition. That's a slide used in the training that kind of shows the process for the evolution of the transition model. On the very bottom of that email, you can see the initiator usually helps start the initiating group, forms then awareness raising, ideally leading to some kind of an unleashing, forming working groups. And then once the working groups are formed, you see that handing over to a steering committee. And that's what we're talking about. That's the new form here. So we sent this whole email, this invitation out to everyone who was on our mailing list, which was at the time, I think, 800-something people, and of course to all the working group leaders to distribute. And so now we have the date. We had the general idea of who was supposed to be in the room. And then we worked with our facilitator to create the agenda, which you have. And then it came time to have the meeting. And I want to make a few points here. Some really critical parts of this were, and this is where our facilitator really, and this is where we'll get into the meat of this. This is some really good stuff. So we got people in the room. We had about 40 people, I think, show up. Many didn't make it the whole day. It was a long day. And some key ingredients that was to agree in the room who was part of this decision-making body and why. So we had to validate for everyone that this was the people. We agreed. We are the people that are showing up. We are the people involved in Transition Sebastopol. We are the ones to make this decision. And we conferred authority on ourselves. So we didn't want somebody later on to say, you know what, it really should have involved, we should have gotten these people in the room, or these people. So we really made it clear, and I think that was a really key point that our facilitator brought in, to make everyone agree. We are the ones to make this decision. We have the authority to make this decision, and we are going to make this decision. So we had unanimous consensus in the room that conferring that authority on ourselves to make that decision. And then we agreed how we would decide during that conference. And I believe we came up with a 80% consensus or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but it could be a majority vote. It could be, you could go for full consensus if you want, or consensus minus one, where it takes only, where one person blocking the consensus is not enough to block it. Consensus minus two, 80%, 75%, however you want to have a decision. But the point is to agree on how the decision is going to be made prior to getting to the point of making that decision, because you don't want people not liking the way it's going, and then they're squabbling over how we're actually going to make that decision. So getting that done up front is really critical. So here we were in the room, and I made a brief presentation about the model of how the transition model works with the initiating group, kind of like what I've talked with you today. And then we brought in, what we did is we presented three possible scenarios. And I wish I had the slides, which unfortunately you'll have later. But we looked at this prior to this event and came up with 3 sort of models of what were possible structures to evolve into. And I'll go over that real briefly. And then you can look at the slides that illustrate this later. So model 1, well, actually put up our current structure, which was we had these, actually at the time it was 11 working groups, but the initiating group was sort of in the center, making decisions, and the decision was coming from the initiating group out to these working groups around the outside. So the decision-making power, the decision-making was held in the initiating group. That was what the current model was as we came into the room that day. So the first model we looked at was called hands-on. We called this the hands-on working group reps model, where that same core group that met every week was comprised of representatives from the different working groups and that's where all the decision was. And that was a high involvement position, because this was, again, the people that were meeting weekly on the core team were also the leaders, the representatives of the working groups. And that was really hard for people. So Model 1 was difficult. The pros was maximum involvement by each of the working groups. So they're really engaged. But each core team rep would need to be very committed and have the capacity and lots of time and doing lots and lots of work. So that was the strength and weakness of that model. Model 2. Model 2 was that its decision-making is with sort of an elected core team. So the folks on the working group may not necessarily have a representative in the core team. There's just an elected group of people who run the initiative. And executive core team, elected executive core team model, that's what we called it. Well, the weakness there, the strength was more flexibility and capability to move quickly and decisively. When you have a high-powered executive, a lot of strength in the executive model, they can make decisions and just go from there. They don't have to go back and check with the working groups. They just make the decisions. Decisions would not require a larger consensus. The weakness is a feeling of less empowerment of connection by the working group participants. Once they elect these folks, they're off making the decisions, and there's a little less of a connection between the working groups and that core team that's making all the decisions. So that was model number 2. Model number 3 was that there was a admin team that was doing the sort of weekly, day-to-day, high-involvement, high-activity decisions, similar to what the initiating group was. But they answered to an elected body of representatives of the working groups that would gather monthly or less frequently than weekly, who would oversee everything. And we called that sort of the administrative team with a board of directors model. So the board of directors would comprise of a representative from each of the working groups who would meet, and then this admin team, kind of like city council, elected city council officials. There's the city staff, the city managers, right? There's the city manager and the city staff, and then there's these elected group that meets every once in a while that the city staff answers to. And at the end of the day, during our process, that's the model, that's the general model we decided on. Because the folks who had been doing the weekly work, they still were able to do that weekly work, but now they answered to this board, which we named the Working Group Council. I want to
Scott,
I want to share.
Yes, Sharon has her hand up. I think she might have a question or clarification.
I'll take a breath here.
Okay, Sharon, go ahead.
Could you just give us one example of a decision? You were referencing about being able to go ahead and make decisions quickly, et cetera. Give me an example of what you're talking about, please.
Well, one decision, for instance, was some activists wanted to protest in front of the Valero gas station during we had a state proposition around an oil issue around outside. I'm forgetting what the proposition was. But local people were going to be protesting this it was a climate change law that Texas oil companies wanted to repeal in California. And so activists were going to protest at this gas station owned by this Texas oil company that's supporting a proposition. So what does Transition do? Do we join in a protest or not? You know, this came up with Occupy. Who makes decisions about this? What kind of do we get political in this way? Do we do protests? Maybe sometimes those protests are appropriate, maybe they're not. But who decides if the transition issue to get actively involved in a protest? Our group, we tend to stay away from protests. We want to come up with solutions, and rather than being against something, we want to be for something. So we made the decision not to participate in the protest. Is that a good example for you?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else? It would be clearer if you could see the graphics, which hopefully you will later. But if anyone has any questions about the three models I was talking about.
And Scott, you might check your email to make sure it's been sending, if you can. But I don't have it yet. And I guess if anyone has any questions or comments, press 1 on your keypad.
It's sending. It's 65%. So.
Okay.
All right. So now we had a map that we created of the event early on, and we drew it out on the wall. So it started with and it was graphically, and you'll see it when you get the slides. But we had a nice, heartful opening, heart and soul led blessing and that kind of a thing. And then we went up to a 3,000-foot context where we talked about the transition. This is sort of the design of the day. We talked about the transition model. We explained the idea of the initiating group and what I've talked about when to make this shift and how it goes to working groups. And we kind of laid it out for people in the room so they saw what the transition model is and talked about the handbook quotes I've read and so forth. And then we laid out these three possible organizational general models. We said, look, it's not limited to this, but this is the thinking that the initiating group had done. And we kind of came up with these three models that we thought were probably in the ballpark and that identified the challenges, especially the challenges of people having just so much time to get involved. And so we laid all that out. Then we went down and conferred authority on ourselves to make this decision, defined the we. Who is the we, and are we the we that makes the decision? And we decided on the decision-making method. So we all agreed on that. Then we went into tasks to consider. And we put up a big butcher paper on the wall. And so for this new structure, what are the things that this structure needs to do? And a lot of the folks from the initiating group came up and put up all the things that they've been doing the awareness-raising movie nights, helping, with the fundraising, doing the tabling at events, all the things that they do. And other people add, well, also the core team should do this. And so we had this big butcher paper of these tasks that the new core team should do. So then folks, we deliberated. We looked at, okay, here's what the core team needs to do. Here's what these potential models are. And so there's a lot of back and forth. And then in the design, we gave ourselves space to either come up with a perfect design during that day or not quite get there and offload it to a committee or come back for more. And so the progress we made during that day is that after a lot of deliberation and sharing, we really decided that something very close to that third model was the one that we all came to consensus and agreed that we wanted to do, the working group council model, where there was an admin team that was doing the day-to-day, but ultimately they answered to the working group council. So rather than that admin team having all the power, the working group council had the power, but the admin team was working on a more weekly basis. And that the admin team was actually one of the working groups. So they also had a rep on the working group council. So we got pretty far, but then there was all these questions about, well, who gets to be on the working group council? How long do they get to be on the working group council? And what do the working groups need to do to be part? There was just so many of these questions. There's just no way we could work out all these details in this one gathering in one day. And so at the end of the day, we agreed that there would be a committee formed with a representative from each of the working groups that would form a restructuring committee, and that they would meet and report back, and we gave ourselves a couple of months to do this, and they report back at a certain time with a proposal for the details of all this worked out, and that this would be sent around to all the working groups, the 11 I guess we had at the time, for ratification. And so we formed that restructuring group that day. We got all the reps agreed. We set a date when we were going to meet, and off we went. And so we met for several months, a weekly basis, and slowly but carefully hammered out our Constitution, which you received as part of the package here. So that's the structure that we came up with during that time period. We sent a draft around to the working groups, and we got back a few pretty good suggestions that we met back, we compared the feedback, and we made some changes that were brought to us by the working groups, a few changes, not many. We sent it back out, and then we got formal ratification from all the working groups that this is the Constitution that we want to adopt. And then at that
Scott,
point...
Jill has her hand up. I'm wondering if she has a clarification or something. So
yes.
Let's hear from you, Jill.
Yes. Well, I had a question. Now I've forgotten what it is, but now I'm on to another question. So they ratified the Constitution, but I thought the purpose was to work out the design for transformation from IG to steering. How did the Constitution come to be a part of that?
Well, the Constitution...
Or is that process folded, or was that described in the Constitution?
Yes, it was described in the Constitution.
Oh, okay.
But part of the process was that we agreed on that day is that once the Constitution was agreed on, then each working group would then send their representative to this working group council. So we agreed on the general structure, which was a big breakthrough. Took all day, lots of deliberation, very well facilitated. It seemed like it might have been one simple decision, but it was a big decision because we came up with a fundamental structure of having a working group council, and we agreed that the power and the decisions would ultimately reside with the working group council, and that the admin group, there would be this admin group that would be one of the working groups. That was the big decision. Then all the little things that you see in that Constitution, if you open up that file, all the particulars still needed to be worked out. And so that's what the restructuring team did after this metamorphosis gathering that we had. So the shift occurred, but we had to work out the details. And then once it was finally ratified, this structuring team ran things in the interim as more or less the initiating group. And then once it was ratified, then it was about implementing it. And so a meeting was called. There was going to be the first date this took 6 months from the point of having this metamorphosis to the first meeting of the working group council. Part of that is the summer came and things kind of slowed down a lot in the summer. But then, so the date was set, and then the working group council had their first meeting of reps from each of these working groups, and that's been going on. It's been going on since. It got a little bit of a slow start, but it's working, and it's working well. And what's beautiful about it is that in transition, the real authority in a transition initiative really is in the working groups. It's who's doing the work, who are actually doing the projects. There shouldn't be an executive body up on high somehow removed from the process that have the authority. And so it just feels so much better that when it comes to making decisions, and I believe it's an 80% consensus decision that they came up with deciding. That group decided on their own, the working group council decided their own decision-making process. And so ultimately the authority lies with the working groups, not some sort of elite group somewhere that was self-selected. And that's the beauty of it. Any other questions?
Or comments?
Yeah.
If anyone has any comments? I know it was a lot. It was a big process, as Scott describes, and so I'm sure there might be some additional comments too. Maybe there's good ways of simplifying it. To you, Jill?
Well, I just first want to say thank you so much, Scott, because that really helped a lot. I think my team members would agree. Right? Yeah. Karen wants to say something.
Hey, Scott, it's Karen. That was very helpful. That filled in a lot of blanks that had formed in the outline in my brain. We have undertaken to, as the initiating group, 1 working group member and 5 working groups out there, so far unrepresented in our work. But we have undertaken to write the Constitution and post it. We have a large following on not only our transitionjoshuatree.org page, but also our Facebook page. And hopefully we're maybe in the beginning of this long process you just described, but we've posted the Constitution and the beginning of our strategic plan for the future, and ask for feedback from all the folks who are involved. We'll see where that goes.
Great. Some groups form their constitutions and or charters right from the get-go that lay everything out, right when they first meet. And that's fine. That's great. And it works out pretty well. I like the way we did it in a sense because we did ours, I guess, 2.5 years after we were a fairly active transition initiative. So we were building our Constitution not on theory, but actually on our practical experience of having had the experience of doing this for a while, having lots of working groups. And so I'm really proud of the kind of the structure we developed. And you're welcome to take our Transition Sebastopol Constitution, and there's a number of other constitutions and charters on the Transition US website. If you go to the home page, you'll see the Knowledge Hub tab. Press on Knowledge Hub, and then it goes to sample documents, I believe. Confirm this. Yes, it goes sample. So resources, once you go in the Knowledge Hub, resources, sample documents, click on that, and it goes to constitutions and charters. And you can see a number of constitutions and charters that differ. In fact, I cut and paste some of the information from some of those, and you have that document of supporting, Caroline, I think you might have renamed it, but
yeah, supporting documents for the call.
That's not all of their constitution. I just kind of cut and pasted some parts that were dealing with structure. We used that document that I just sent around as a reference during our gathering, our Metamorphosis gathering, so we could pass that around, look at how different groups did things, and so just to give us, it just kind of helped us get thinking. So that you can look at our constitution is posted up there, as well as others, just to get some ideas. I want to make one point though that largely, one of the problems some initiatives have is that initiatives can be driven by, one or several strong personalities, and sometimes that's really good because you get someone who's just they're really making it happen. They just have the energy, they have the skills, they're pulling it together, they're a superstar, and without them, nothing would happen, and that's really great. And essential. And sometimes these people are the key, and they're the initiator or whatever. And other times, it can also get to be too much, where it becomes sort of personality-driven, or one person is just kind of dominant, or there's personality issues that can come in. And so having a system like this, where it shifts to a council, not a small group where maybe one person can dominate, is really, I think, healthy for the group. And I was the initiator of Transition Sebastopol, and got it going, was very sort of initially sort of dominant myself. And I made the choice after I was on the restructuring team, but I made the choice not to be on the new working group council. And I haven't been for the last, going on almost a year now. I just thought it was so much better for having, because I was a strong personality. People sometimes defer to me because I was the quote founder, and it was given my personality and everything. I thought, and I think it was much healthier that I decided to step back and let others step up, because sometimes, I took up a lot of room, and it was very healthy for the group for me to let others run it and sort of take a sidestep. And I'm getting back in. I'm resuscitating the food group now and doing a project, but I took a break from it, and for our group and for me, that was a healthy thing. I'm not saying necessarily for your group, but I think part of this is that I've seen groups, as I've done many transition trainings around the country. Some groups have a very strong dominant personality that that sometimes is good, sometimes maybe not so good, and this is kind of inoculates a group from having that be too limiting. So I think that's one of the factors here.
Scott, there's a couple more questions. Sandy, and back to the Joshua Tree group, and then Francis. And then we're going to wrap up for the call today. So go ahead, Sandy.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's been a very good session. I feel that first of all, I'm with Mountain Communities of Resilience in Anza, California, and we have I think 6 people on our initiating group. And the best thing that you've done for me is to validate where we are and to say that we're on track, and we've had some of the same issues, and we've toyed with when do we become initiative, how long do we get out of the mulling group thing, and so forth. But one thing I wanted to add was we've been using Meetup, and it's been a real great tool for us to get new people involved and interested in what we're doing. We even have people coming up from some of the surrounding communities that are not, quote-unquote, on the hill, as we call it up here in Anza. And they've had some great insights that have added to what we're doing here. So I think we just need to be a little more patient. I think we're on track, and I just want to thank you very much for what you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Sandy.
Meetup I've heard of a lot of groups really having Meetup be a powerful tool for them.
Yes. It really has worked for us.
To Joshua Tree.
No, I've forgotten again. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. To Francis.
Administrative team that makes the day-to-day things happen, and I wondered if you could define further what that administrative team does.
Well, the administrative team does a lot of those original things that the initiating group does, laying foundations, relationships with other groups. They handle a lot of the awareness-raising events. They do the movie night, and handle things like finances. And if there's a special event that, like a parade we're going to be in, or doing tabling or certain kind, especially the awareness-raising things, it doesn't really fit neatly into the working groups. And so the communications events, and web stuff, email lists, giving talks. Those are the kinds of things that an administrative group really handles. We have found that some groups that we called working groups are really administrative support groups. Like you'll see in the slide that we had the communications group as a separate working group, but really what the communications group was a support group that was formed for a while to support the initiative. So we felt that a group that's there to support, rather the working groups, to support the working groups. Let's say if there's some groups that have had a fundraising group, or we had a communications team. Some groups have heart and soul groups that do nothing but serve the people that are working in the heart and soul groups to help them relieve burnout, that kind of thing. So a group that does not reach out to the wider community to create resilience, but is more about focusing, serving the working groups, might be part of an administrative core team. So within the administrative group, there's sort of these little spin-off groups that have sort of formed to support the working groups. Working groups were defined more as groups that were working outwardly in the community to create resilience.
And Scott, certainly the film nights and that is that function, but I can see it might not fit neatly in a working group. But I suppose there could be an awareness raising group or something as well.
Yeah, and again, this is where the transition model is so flexible that you might have a whole different structure. You might decide awareness raising group is its own separate group, and this is just the way we did, just given the personalities we had, given the work that people had already been doing the work and so forth. But that's not, this is, you could easily have an awareness raising group be its own separate group.
Well, thank you. Scott, we're going to wind down soon, so we're in the last 5 minutes. Up to you if you want to see if there's more questions or wrap up or anything like that.
Well, if you can refer to the resources, when you do get the PDF file, you can look through the images that we're describing what I'm talking about. And you can see the maps of the different structures in Totnes and Transition Sebastopol. I put in some pictures. Actually, I took out the pictures so we'd have a smaller file, but it didn't get to you anyway. But you can see some of that. And then the invitation I sent, the agenda, and our Constitution, those are just resources of what we came up with. But the main thing, I think, is to involve everyone who's active in your group. I highly suggest having an outside facilitator do this process, someone that you trust and everyone agrees with. Work with them in advance of having your process. And you don't necessarily have to have a process in one day like we did. Maybe it happens over 6 months in smaller meetings. That's perfectly fine. So maybe having a facilitator in one day isn't the way you end up doing it. That's just the way it worked for us. And I like the idea of getting everyone involved. So everyone who's doing something in transition in your initiative has a voice. They have a voice in what this new structure is going to be. It's not decided for them, but they have that invitation to co-create that decision about what the event's going to be. So I think as long as that's happening, where people feel they're co-creating and it's not just sort of handed to them, this is what it's going to be, I think that's, I think it's the most powerful thing. And to have to design some kind of a process and for you to agree on that process in advance, confer that authority on yourself to make it, really document that and then involve everyone. I think it worked fairly well. It was rough. A lot of groups really have difficulty going through this process. It can be very challenging. People want to do it in different ways. People on the initiating group, they want to hold on. They like being in that position of authority, and they don't want to give up power. I've heard of groups almost falling apart going through. We had real challenges in our group. It was difficult, I'll be honest with you. But we made it through. And at the end of the day, we have a very strong, very democratic, very consensus-building group that's, our initiative is run by the people that are actually doing the work in the working groups. The authority is in the working groups where it belongs, and that's the beautiful part about it.
Joshua Tree has their hand up, and then we'll do sort of a closing. Everyone can say sort of their takeaways. So go ahead.
So I just wanted one last clarification about the process you used. So my understanding is first you tried just opening the whole thing to anybody who wanted to show up, and that was too chaotic. I'm a little confused from there. Did you then, when you say you decided or the initiating group decided, did you decide on what 3 models you would present to your members at this larger meeting? Where was at what point were you making final decisions? At what points along the way?
Well, there was the actual process of deciding on the structure, which we wanted everyone to be involved in. Everyone meaning people that had been engaged in some level beyond just showing up at a public event. But what we did do is that we opened up the process to design the process of deciding. And that proved to be too chaotic. And it was contentious, and there was people showing up, and got a little ugly, frankly. And so the initiating group went, okay, this is not working. We pulled back, and we made a few people angry. We said, you know what, we're going to design the process day. You're still going to decide. It's just, but to design the process day, we have to do this in a smaller group. So we did that. We pulled it back. We huddled together, and then we disagreed a lot. We needed a facilitator to it changed up to the night before we went in there. We weren't going to present those 3 models until the night before finally we got agreement on that. So it was difficult. So you have to hash it out. What is your process going to be to decide? Design the day. Design the whether maybe it's multiple days. You have to design the process. That's what we did as an initiating group, and we just kicked ideas back and forth. I proposed these 3 models because it was kind of confusing to people to get their heads around a lot of this stuff, and so we thought, well, let's put some sort of a context to it. Present these 3 as possible models to present the issues, but then open it up to any kind of additional idea that anybody has. So that was debatable whether or not we said, well, that's constricting to present 3 models, and that was a good point. So we went back and forth on that. We ended up coming to consensus to present these sort of ideas with the idea that these are just 3 ideas. There's many more. We're kind of giving you an idea of what we're talking about here. Now let's open up the discussion. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Let's do a closing round, just briefly going through and hearing what your takeaways are. Starting with your group, Hank.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hi. Yeah, this has been extremely enlightening, and we're a ways away from this, but so we have some time to kind of sort this out. But I think we have some very different ideas and views of what the working group and steering committee and or council structure might look like, but I think we have a lot of work to do there. Anybody else in the group here want to comment? I think that's our takeaway.
Thank you very much. Kathy? Kathy, are you on mute?
Hi, am I here now?
Yep.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, what I wanted to offer was that I've gotten a much better appreciation for how Sebastopol has dealt with the tension between wanting to get things done, move forward, and finding a way to get the highest possible personal involvement and investment in the process, and that it's taken time. That there's a certain amount of patience that's required in terms of continuing to pay attention to what's going on within the various working groups and who's doing the work, and then bringing in the people that have the passion to stay with it. Because what I'm hearing is a lot of commitment to attend a lot of decision-making meetings and to work through the process. So congratulations as far as staying with it long enough to what sounds like you've got a really workable structure right now for your group.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. And possibly putting in a structure, this idea put forward of that working group council, maybe getting that in place earlier might be a little easier for some groups. So let us know your experiences as well. We'd love to get more feedback on this whole topic area. To the Joshua Tree folks, and then we'll hear from Susan, Francis, Steve, Sharon, and Sandy.
Everybody, thanks for giving us the opportunity and all the information. Thanks for showing up, Kathy. It's nice to hear you're on the road and still staying in touch. Kathy and her partner have really been helpful since coming on board after the training. I've gotten a real good idea, as Kathy mentioned, of the possible timeline and how it can take 6 months to get something done, or 2 months, or a span of time that is a lot longer than a day. So thanks for that insight.
Wonderful. Susan?
I appreciate the time that you gave us and all the information. Most of the people in our initiating group are on this call, and we have a lot to take away, and we are meeting on Wednesday, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and again, let us know what you decide. Francis?
Thanks. I'll just echo what Susan said. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sharon?
The same, and I'm in awe of the perseverance, and I think that the the concept of having the strong leader is really useful, and how strong leadership sometimes has to take a step back. So thank you for the time, and we definitely will need to think this over.
Wonderful. And Sandy?
Yes, again, thank you, Carolyn and Scott. Really appreciated your work and your insights. And I've got renewed enthusiasm. I think at least 2 or 3 of our initiating team members are also on the call. I'm hoping so. So I know we'll have much to talk about, too. Thank you.
All right, and some people had to drop off already, so that's we've heard from everyone still on the call. And I personally want to thank you, Scott. I know you've been tireless in this work, and now you have a lot of wisdom to share for it, so appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I encourage people to look at the document you will ultimately get, and also refer to the Transition Companion. It's such a great resource. It talks a lot about these issues.
And do let us know as well of other topics that would be really helpful for you. Obviously, this one was a great topic for this kind of interaction today, so please let me know of some others as they come up for you. And we're signing off now, and just appreciate everyone out there doing this great work. And more than ever, just really appreciate these opportunities where we can come together, hear your voices, and just connect like this. So be well all. Until next time.